Tonight we're talking physics, illness, the future, optics, and the human eye with Dr. Richard Rosen from Mount Sinai's New York Eye and Ear Infirmary. I suffer from a condition called Central Serous Retinopathy. And Central Serous Retinopathy is a form of wet macular degeneration. And doctor, could you explain a little bit what this is? And I wanted to do this episode so that people would know, so that they would know to get their eyes checked.
So Central Serous Retinopathy it's a real unknown in terms of what causes it. What happens is there's an accumulation of fluid under the retina, so it's a focal retinal detachment. And the way you might be aware of it is, there's a change. Things look a little bit smaller. They may be a little bit blurred. Some distortion within your central field of vision, which is typically how patients present. It's like the fourth leading cause of eye like retinopathy, and it's not really age-related macular degeneration. Mm-hmm. It is a form of macular degeneration, but it occurs in young, otherwise healthy individuals. It's more common in men and women by about 5 times. Probably the incidence, is somewhere about 10 per 100,000.
Now, I remember when I was first diagnosed with it, and the clinicians that I was seeing at the time remarked immediately how they were seeing women with it for the first time, and that usually they mostly saw it only in aggressive males.
Type A personalities.
Type A personalities and bodybuilders. And in bodybuilders' case, they thought the relationship was to steroid use. Is that...
Strong association with cortisol, which is a stress hormone that our body produces, or if you take androgens to build up your muscles, or, if you have some disorder which makes excess amount of cortisol in the body, or you're taking medicines that have some form of steroid, that individuals who are predisposed. So the retina is lifted up from the pigment epithelial layer, which is the caretaker cells of the retina. And, over the years, we've found that it's related to the blood supply underneath the retina, the choroid. And the choroid is where you have the fastest blood flow in the body. And it's also related to it's similar to the kidney. It's sort of a big spongy layer of multiple blood vessels. Basically, if there's a defect in the blood supply because of the heart, or there is some toxin in the system, you're going to feel it first. Really, the eye, the retina is brain tissue, but it's brain tissue at the surface of the eye. And so it responds just the way the rest of the brain is. It's very, very...
That's amazing. Rapid. I never thought of it that way. But it's just the furthest extension of the brain to the outside world.
So there are different forms of this condition, and the majority of people who get this get a very sort of self-limited process, meaning that it comes and goes within a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And if it's very focal, if the leak of the fluid is very focal, then it's very amenable to treatment with laser. Mm-hmm. You could just treat that one area to seal it off. The fluid will reabsorb. Then there are a group of people that have more diffuse leakage. It's more difficult. Every place you treat, you create scar tissue, so it becomes difficult. So it doesn't work for the more diffuse forms of the disease. And then there are people who, like yourself, who get a chronic form, which, you've had different types of laser treatment before you came to me, mm-hmm. and none of it seemed to really benefit you. It's kind of stayed at a certain level. The interesting thing is that when you have a retinal detachment due to a tear in the retina, the vision drops down immediately. But in this case, because there's just like a fluid space between the retina and where the blood supply is, the vision may be maintained for a very long time, despite being sort of separated from its main blood supply.
Yeah, my case, my eyes adjusted. In fact, they adjusted so much that I didn't notice for about a year. I sort of like, oh, yeah, my eyesight, I'm just getting old, you know, and that's, so again, so I mean, I was a year even before treatment. And, yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing. I mean, your eye can sort of adapt to feel its way out.
But your eye doesn't really adapt. Your brain adapts.
Exactly, yeah.
So your brain really can take the picture. You know, people talk about, well, great stuff that AI can do to the image, right? But your brain does that, you know, in a much more sophisticated way.
And so,
It will tend to fill in parts that it doesn't see. It will fill in parts from, you know, because you have the two eyes working together, and so it will reconstruct the image very much. And, you know, we have people who have loss of one eye from retinal detachment or something happening, and they don't even notice for years until something gets in their good eye and suddenly, oh my God, this happened all at once. It may have been there for years.
most of the people you see, like, what age group are they in?
So they're usually in their somewhere 30s, 40s, 50s. When it gets beyond in their 60s, then the changes tend to be related to age-related macular degeneration. But earlier than that, it tends to be this condition, which, as I say, there's certain signs that we see now that the choroid is a little bit thicker, and we think that may actually squeeze some of the small capillaries, and that may be responsible for loss of circulation to the rods and cones, which then can lead to formation of new blood vessels, which that can cause devastating loss of vision right away, so like wet macular degeneration. And some of those are actually responsive to injections.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have a good, solid treatment for this. I mean, you know, when we give lectures on this to doctors training them, Larry Annuzzi, who was one of my teachers and has done a lot of research in this over the years, will put up a slide that has like 60 different treatments for it. And obviously, anytime you have a disease that has so many different treatments, you know, we haven't got the right one yet.
Yeah, of course. Ultimately, what's the danger of a condition like this? What is the risk?
Well, you get scar tissue. And when you get scar tissue, you know, that those are areas that are damaged and we may not be able to repair.
And if I understand correctly, it's very, very, very difficult to repair retina damage, if not impossible, usually.
Yeah, you can cut and paste, you can put things back in place, but when metabolically things aren't working well, then you may not be able to fix that. And this is the problem that you get, as I say, with age-related macular degeneration as well. So sometimes when there's just a little bit of fluid, if you get the fluid to go away, it may stabilize the vision, but there still may be loss in the areas where there was damage.
So that's why if you're in between your 30s and your 40s and you're the type of person that doesn't go to the doctor or doesn't go to the ophthalmologist, and it's not just the optometrist, because you really have to go see an ophthalmologist regularly and actually get your retina scanned. If you don't do this, you could find yourself in a situation that you don't want to be in. Let's talk about the imaging and where your interests come from, doctors. We were talking about that before, and I find that absolutely fascinating. Your fascination with physics and how it relates to your work.
Years ago, I started out as a photographer in the days when it used to be wet processing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Can I ask you a camera?
Well, I used anything from Nikons to Deerdorf 11 by 14,
Oh, wow.
large film, and did work like, you know, catalog photography. And when I had the opportunity, once I had finished my training, I sort of returned to my roots and had developed a laboratory at the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary. So we built a number of prototype instruments. with different universities,
Wow.
University of Kent in England, at Stanford Medical College, Wisconsin, for looking at smaller and smaller spaces in living retinas. So, I think there have been some fundamental improvements. James Fujimoto and David Wong at MIT in 1991 came up with this concept of OCT. And OCT, those are the images that we take all the time. And basically, it's kind of like an MRI of the retina. So we can see all the layers, all the cells in the retina. We see the layers. We don't actually see the individual cells. In the laboratory, we actually look at the individual cells.
Wow.
But that's beyond what we need for clinical work right now. And we started building those with the group at University of Kent. And gradually, the technology has gotten better and better so that we can detect very small changes in blood flow, changes in the structures of cells, which are responsible for a lot of the diseases that we see, clinical diseases.
And you're able to do this by focusing on certain spectrum of the light, or a certain spectrum of the magnetic imaging?
So we use primarily the infrared because infrared doesn't bother the individual. So when you take those pictures, you don't get. It's not like you're looking at a bright light like we're looking at here in the studio.
It's a heat image.
Well, it's not. It's in that spectrum.
It's in that spectrum. Yeah,
It's in that spectrum, but it's scanned. It's a scanned image, so it's very, very granular. You can look at very small spaces. You can axial lengths of somewhere just a couple of microns, and just the lateral resolution of just a few microns as well. And so when light goes into the eye, it is distorted by the different tissues, by the fluid in the eye. And so we use a deformable mirror, which has a lot of little pistons in it, that actually flattens the waveform of the light.
Wow.
And that, eliminates a lot of the noise. So we can see individual rods and cones.
That's stunning. And that's just from correcting just different diffraction.
Well, we're at the
diffraction.
limit of diffraction, but basically, we're taking the light that's coming back from the eye, and we are straightening it out, correcting it, and you get an image that shows you small changes. We can see, tiny little areas where, like, the blood is clotting in patients who have diabetes or sickle cell disease or a lot of these vascular diseases. So it gives us a new sort of vista on a lot of disease that we previously would use an ophthalmoscope, like what we look with in the office. And, this has really exploded over the period of my career. So this imaging is being tied to robotics that can move with the same level of precision. So in surgery, so we've been working with a surgical robot that will basically hold within like less than 5 microns of movement when you operate on the retina. So if you tie that with imaging devices that are that close to that level, then you can, do very, very fine procedures to fix retinas. We could do injections of gene therapy. Potentially, we can interact with different layers of cells within the retina. There's gene therapy for certain inherited retinal diseases. It's just at the beginning, and there are many, many studies that are going on to try to correct. Some people are born with errors in their genetics that they lose their vision very early. Mm-hmm. So one of the first gene therapies was approved for children that are born with a form of similar to retinitis pigmentosa, and they lose their vision at a very young age, really within the first couple of years of life. And so you can actually correct that with gene therapy.
That's amazing. You mentioned the robot. I'm just going to digress for one moment because I about a year and a half ago, I had a double hernia operation. And the surgeon, who's a wonderful man, excellent surgeon, he asked me, he's like, well, look, we can do it, we're going to do it through orthoscopically, and we can either do it manually or we could use robots. And he's like, do you have any problem using it with the robots? And I'm like, does it cost any more money? And he goes, well, no, of course not. And I was like, well, then absolutely no. I've always wanted robots inside my body for my whole life. I've waited for my entire existence to have robots operate on me. And this is perfect. And you mentioned the robot surgery. And I realized the reason why he had asked me is because people have a very instinctual, some people have an instinctual rejection to the idea. Not like me, who's all in. But do you find that people are resistant to that kind of technology?
Well, I think it's just an extension of what we can do. So the human body has, in a skilled surgeon, they've measured the tremor, somebody who is at the top of their game. So their tremor is somewhere about 100 microns, tenth of a millimeter, very small. But when you're working on the surface of the retina, which is like the surface of the brain, you want it to be perfectly still. Or if you're working inside the body, even in a larger space, so the human beings have to breathe. The blood is flowing through them. They're vibrating, right? It's all movement. Robots have the ability to be perfectly still. So you can put them in a certain place, and you can direct them and stop, so they're not going to move. So you can control the movements that you do, very fine movements in surgery. I think that, as people understand what the capabilities are, they realize that it's just one step. I mean, people were resistant to computers, right?
Yeah, true.
And now we can't live without them.
And
people are resistant to
vaccines, too. Do you find that your love of science in physics in general spills and affects the rest of your work?
Well, yeah, you start to think about the physics of what you do. I love chemistry also. Think about the chemistry of what different processes that occur, why they don't work or why they work. So the basic science you can infuse into your life. I mean, as long as you're not afraid of it. It's like mathematics too. A lot of people are like, oh no, I hated that in school. The truth of it is, it adds a dimension and gives you. It's just a tool. And the sciences, I mean, but the arts are the same way.
Absolutely.
They definitely provide a perspective that enriches what you're doing, and oftentimes gives you that sort of out of the ballpark answer that maybe straight engineering won't have. My director in the laboratory, Dr. Toko Chui, is an artist. And very excellent artist. And very often she comes up with solutions. I mean, she's an imaging specialist that my engineers didn't think of.
That's amazing.
So
it's just because that's just a different way of thinking, different way of seeing things.
Right, putting it all together. I mean, it's they say that all creativity is very, very similar along a continuum, that you have these moments. The punchline are moments where you have two different planes of knowledge and thinking, and it's where they intersect. There's a line of intersection where you have these moments of insight that spark a laugh or spark a scientific insight.
So you feel both as a man working in a theoretical science, in physical science, and in applied science, in the curation of the body, and to a certain extent also the soul. I mean, again, when you find out your vision's going, you're usually a psychological mess. Do you find there is a space in all of that where you can be the same person? Are you the same person when you're wearing all those roles, or is it a different person for every role?
No, I think I'm all the same person. It's just, you focus on different things, sometimes I like to listen to rock and roll, and sometimes I like to listen to Bach. It really, it's a different mood, right? But it's all part of the same mechanism. It's all part of the same person. Structuring the light.
Structuring light, yeah.
So you talk about your sunglasses,
Yeah.
okay? So, one way that people can control glare is with polarized lenses, right?
Yes.
So basically, a Polaroid lens is basically, it's like a Venetian blind on a molecular level in terms of letting light in only at a certain orientation. So by controlling the orientation, so
there's two types of, right? There's circular polarizers and straight polarizers. So I guess straight polarizers are like a Venetian blind, and circular poles, they're kind of arranged in spirals.
like in like a radial pattern.
A radial pattern, okay. And that's...
Well, so basically, the idea is that you're controlling how those waves are interacting with whatever focal point you have. By controlling how the light hits the object you want to view, you can see different aspects. So one of the things that we utilize in our lab, when I talked about the adaptive optics imaging, is we'll use not the confocal light, which is light that goes through a tiny pinhole, which gives you a specific level, but we'll use...
It's like what you do using a pinhole camera, or even a regular camera.
Right. We'll use the diffuse light that bounces off, the non-confocal light, and by using that, collecting that in different quadrants of looking at a particular object, you can actually see the three-dimensional modeling, how something, the shape of, say, a blood vessel, and all of the details of the wall of a single capillary.
So it's an image that exists that a natural eye could never see, where the image exists just from constructing from the diffuse light.
Right. We see, the light is coming in pretty much straight on, right.
That's why we kind of like cameras. That's why we,
But if you adjust the light and you collect it in a particular fashion, you can look at different aspects of what you're looking at.
So when we see like in an animal, like with a segmented eye or something like that, they really are seeing the world in a completely different way because they're seeing not the confocal light coming at them, but the...
Right. So most animals, are concerned with predators.
Yeah.
Right. So they're not really interested in the resolution. They're looking at motion. Yeah. So they want sensitivity to motion and light, and so that's that. And so some of them, instead of having a single point, like we have a macula with a point where we sort of focus on things, they'll have a streak.
Because you're trying to get it on something.
They'll have a streak where they see optimally, so they can see things that are happening out here, things that are happening out here. Some sort of predator that's going to attack.
That's awesome. Or like the mantis shrimp with the massive 14 different kinds of rods and cones.
Yeah, it's different.
But yeah, it's all not so you don't think.
Right. You have birds. The birds that come feed on fish, they dive down. They actually have two maculas, one for the air and one for the water, because it changes. The refractive power changes as you go into water. It's the interface that the light goes through that determines the focus. So, when you swim underwater, you try to look at things underwater, it's pretty out of focus, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right, because your eye is designed for the light to be focused from air into water. When you just have water to water, it doesn't focus the same way. So animals, have different applications depending on what their environment is and what their needs are. Our eyes are close in the middle. We have the non-carnivores that their eyes are on the side, right?
Rabbits,
they're just kind of looking, keep them from they see a predator on the side. So the applications of the the evolution of the eye is amazing.
Starting around the late 80s, early 90s, a argument against evolution started to come up again and again and again based on one note of Darwin's, trembling at the eye. In that time, and certainly in my lifetime, multiple times I've heard multiple extremely good justifications that, that there's nothing that weird about the eye. We figured it out. We figured it out a long time ago. Do you still hear people looking at the structures of the eye, which I feel could be a little better? Personally, if there is a God, he didn't do a great job on the eye, but in general, I mean, what do you say to that when you see evolution denialists as a scientist who works in a field that is very much?
Well, usually that's because they don't appreciate the complexity of the rest of the universe. I mean, the complexity of everything, the rest of our structures. I mean, the life itself is such an anomaly. Think about it. If you say you're interested in physics, entropy always wins, right?
Absolutely.
It always increases. Well, life is anti-entropy, right?
Yeah, exteriorizing it always.
It's the reverse.
Yeah.
So it's but the complexity of all of the different structures. I mean, the eye is something that people notice, but if you study the microstructure of any organisms, they're amazing. I mean, just from a single cell is say, well, where did this come from? I mean, this is just somebody had to design it, but
it's the elegance of accident.
I don't know that it's such an accident. It's something about how matter. There's a quality to matter that seems to be have assembled itself and generated. Yeah,
Emergently, sort of coming up like certain patterns, certain regularities to the universe just happen to emerge at certain moments.
Yeah, depending on how you believe that happened, whether there was somebody outside pulling strings or whether the intelligence is inherent in the matter and energy itself.
Doctor, that has been an absolute delight. It's been delighting. It is a delight knowing you and working with you. It's a delight for talking to you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Doctor, thank you. It's awesome.